We are rolling. I think this is an amount of cleave I'm comfortable with. Hello, welcome welcome back to my channel. During my first run of Fire Emblem 3 houses, I chose the magically oriented Black Eagles house to accompany the main character Byleth. Every member of the Black Eagles house is a highborn, blue-blooded noble, except for one, Dorothea Arnault, who quickly became one of my favorite characters in the game. She was born of an affair between a maid and a nobleman. The scandal of it all led to her being orphaned at a young age after her father kicked them out and her mother dying of illness shortly thereafter. In 90s supermodel fashion, she was just out and about on the town when she was discovered by the Middle Frank Opera Company and quickly became one of their dulcet divas and esteemed songstress. Dorothea is 18 at the start of the game. She is a little bit on the older end of the student cast. She has enrolled at Garrick Mach's Officers Academy in order to secure her future, not by becoming a legendary mage, but by marrying into nobility. She doesn't just want a marriage of convenience, though. She also seeks love. We love a woman who wants to have her cake and eat it too. Dorothea immediately struck me as one of the more interesting characters in the game. In a slew of nobles intent on inheriting their parents' titles, Dorothea stands out amongst this crowd. As a famous singer, her circumstances for being at the academy are pretty different to most of the other characters. She doesn't have a family name that she can lean on, but her clout still offers her access to these upper class spaces. It's kind of hand-waved how she's paying for her enrollment. Some unseen noble in the background is helping her. If it wasn't confirmed, I would have just assumed that she was paying her own way through school. Like, she's probably wealthy to some degree. She's working late because she's a singer. Dorothea still faces similar issues to a lot of the other characters, especially in terms of family drama and the politics surrounding marriage in this setting. But I do think some of these topics are more interesting when viewed through her lens. Fodlan is the country this game takes place in. In this society, there is very limited opportunity for social and class mobility, and her rise from poverty uniquely positions her as someone who is welcomed in by the upper class, but she deeply resents the nobility. I'm just saying, I have a feeling that she would be a Luigi fan. In terms of the main story, Dorothea is unfortunately trapped in side character hell, and most of her content is supplementary. We'll get to that in a moment. Three Houses is split into two parts, the school phase and the war phase. If a character dies in combat during the school phase, they'll still participate in the story, but by the time part 2 hits, they're just gone. In order to accommodate this, most of the side cast will have a little quip for flavor. They'll throw their 2 cents in, but otherwise they're not really heard from, and that makes it easier to write them out in the event that they do die. The most of what we see from Dorothea in the main story is that she's a flirt, she's a pacifist, she doesn't really believe in the fighting, but she's extremely loyal. She's gonna see the war through to the end because her friends believe in it. She's certainly loyal to Edelgard, the Black Eagles house leader, but her role hinges a little bit more on Byleth, as almost every character will bow to the whims of the player self-insert. Dorothea is obviously immediately available if you choose the Black Eagles, but she's also recruitable to the other 2 houses, and she's probably one of the easier units to bring on. In order to have a character defect from their house during the school phase of the game, you need to train Byleth in a certain stat and skill. Dorothea asks for decent proficiencies in the authority skill and the charm stat, both of which have to do with leading battalions, a mechanic unique to Three Houses in which a character leads their own military unit. You gain authority EXP every turn just by having a battalion equipped, and Byleth has a decent charm growth as well. That is all to say, it's easier to recruit Dorothea than it is to make Byleth a mage and recruit some of those characters who ask for magic proficiencies. That's a little bit harder for Byleth to obtain just with the way the character and the systems work. In Three Houses, anyone can become anything in terms of class. It's really a sandbox class system. There are only a few class exclusions. However, most units are still predisposed to a certain progression. Dorothea's case is a little bit trickier. I feel like you could very easily have a long-winded debate over where to take her, and a lot of options are valid for her. Her starting stats and proficiencies clearly indicate that she's a magically oriented unit, but her magic growth rate is only 40%. Her growth rate makes her the least consistent, compared to other magic users in her house and even comparable magic users in other houses. Most of them have at least 50%, which is then improved depending on which class you're in. Fire Emblem is partially a game of luck. Stat increases aren't guaranteed on each level up like they are in Pokemon, so Dorothea might be a destroyer of worlds for me, and she might be absolute trash for you. In terms of skills, she's only proficient in swords and reason magic, which is specifically for offensive spells. The proficiency indicates how quickly a unit can gain experience, so she learns swords and reason more quickly, but teaching her to ride a Pegasus is going to take a lot longer. She also lacks a crest, which is a magical attribute passed down genetically that offers greater combat ability and social status. She learns sword attacks that use her magic stat instead, which is useful, but I would argue the path of least resistance for Dorothea is monk into mage into warlock and then probably into Gremory. These classes are all attached to the reason proficiency, and then Gremory also requires faith proficiency, which mostly includes healing magic. Dorothea has a budding talent in faith because Three Houses takes place in a school setting. There's a tutoring function, and if you tutor her in faith enough times, her faith disadvantage turns into a boost instead. I think it's fitting for her character that she has a faith disadvantage. Dorothea really doesn't like the state of the world. She resents nobility, and the church and state are intrinsically linked. Disliking the religion is a part of that. So from a writing perspective, fabulous. But from a game perspective, it's good that it turns into a strength just because she needs it later down the line, and she also gets access to decent healing spells. Her spell list is pretty good too. She has a lot of access to spells that work at range. Thoron is a lightning spell that has extra range compared to most normal spells, and she also is one of a couple characters that has access to Meteor, which is like a heavy duty long ranged attack. Physic is also good for distance healing. There are two quote unquote canon classes for Dorothea. The Warlock line is semi-confirmed as it's the class she is in when you choose a different house. She'll be a Warlock in chapters where you have to fight the Black Eagles. Also, I mentioned character recruitment if you choose another house. The game in the background will level her up in that Warlock class progression. The other dubiously canon option is only available for one unit per run, and that's the Dancer class. Dancers are able to use their action to invigorate another unit to move a second time in a single turn through the mystic power of dance. Obviously, she is a stage performer, so it makes sense for her character, but Three Houses at one point would only allow units to wear their normal outfits at the monastery and generic class outfits on the battlefield unless it was their canon class. This was changed through a later patch, but for a time, the only way Dorothea could be seen in her signature dress in battle was if she was in either the Warlock or Dancer classes, further supporting the idea that these classes are canon, or they're what the developers had in mind when they were designing her. Dancer is also a very viable option for Dorothea, and she gets 6 movement, whereas most mage classes only get 4. Dancer is arguably the best fit for her, but again, Three Houses lets you do whatever you want. If you want Dorothea to wear a suit of armor, it'll absolutely suck to get there, but nothing's stopping you. There's also an interesting use case for Mortal Savant, which is like a relatively useless class, but it's because it's a jack of all trades, master of none kind of situation. Mortal Savant wants to split magical and physical proficiencies, but so does Dorothea with her reason and sword proficiencies. Again, that class also has 6 movement, and it has a better magic growth than Dancer does, so it could be an interesting alternative to Gremory, which is like the main endgame magic class. If you want to try out Mortal Savant, Dorothea might be a good fit for that. I like Dorothea's design. In part 1, everyone wears a variation of the Academy School uniform with some sort of defining characteristic. Dorothea's main identifier is her JoJo's Bizarre Adventure hat. It's so tacky, so ugly, very Camp Rock Disney era. I don't like this hat, but for her, it works. I've discussed her Three Hopes design in a previous video, and I like that outfit, except for the lace. I think that's hard to do, but her Three Houses ensemble is pretty good. I like it a lot, actually. The dress is prettier. I don't love the wrap dress idea over a different knee-length dress. That's a little odd, but the rest is gorgeous. I love that it's backless. The corset is stunning. I love the black ruffle trim. These straps in the back are a little tricky. I do think it creates odd cuts in the shape, and the dress at least hits the floor. So the length is impractical for battle, but it's certainly more glamorous. All I really want for her is a giant witchy hat, like Juna does in Metaphor Refantasio. Her head just seems kind of plain, like there's a lot of negative space up here. I wanted a hat for this video, but I don't have a witch hat, which is wild because I've talked about magical women for the past 5 videos. At least in Three Hopes, she does have like a cute ornate clip in the back, but in Houses, she really has nothing. It's middle part and go. I think she needs a hat or a fascinator like Ivy and Engage has. could be stunning. Each character has a paralogue, which is an additional chapter that gives them some more content. A problem arises with a lot of the side characters' paralogues, as they are often paired with another character that they would otherwise have no connection with. This also leads to the focus of these chapters being pretty unevenly balanced. In Dorothea's paralogue, Rumored Nuptials, Ingrid receives a marriage proposal from a noble that Dorothea knows to be a bad person. This, for whatever reason, takes them to an active volcano, and the map is an escort mission for Ingrid. Dorothea is a girl's girl. She's here to be supportive, but the chapter just isn't really about her. She does have a support string with Ingrid, but it's pretty limited. Oh, that is such a stunning transition. I didn't even write it like that, but we are going to talk about supports next. Support is a side mechanic in especially modern Fire Emblem games that serves many functions. It expands on the characters' relationships, their backstories. There are gameplay benefits to making your characters friendlier with one another, and the most important thing it's for is fueling the shipping wars. Who is best girl? Who are you horny for? Who are you going to make the main character choose in order to fulfill your fantasy? Have you ever wanted to be with a singer? That's going to come up later in a very devastating way. If you count both genders of Byleth, she does have 16 support strings. Some of the through lines stay the same. First of all, she's bisexual. A lot of her supports have to do with romance and dating. In a few of them, she mentions putting on performances around Garrick Mach to raise morale. She's working late. She's a singer. In the ending credits, everyone is given titles. She gets 2, Mystical Songstress and Devoted Heart. If she doesn't end the game attached to anybody, Mystical Songstress will be her title, but it's also included in any ending where her focus after the end of the story is returning to the opera house and continuing her career as a singer. In a lot of Mystical Songstress endings, she's also not explicitly stated to be in a relationship, even in endings where she is paired with another character. Devoted Heart is the title she has mostly when she gets married and gives up her career to focus on a family. These are not concrete delineations. For example, in her ending with Lorenz, she's Mystical Songstress Dorothea, but the ending is literally just about them getting married. It doesn't really explain much of their life after. The opposite is also true, where in her endings with Caspar, they're not explicitly confirmed to be together, but she's also listed as Devoted Heart, and their support string, at least in my reading of it, ends in a pretty platonic place. Byleth is player sexual. Dorothea is one of very few queer romance options for Byleth, but unlike some of the other allegedly gay characters, Dorothea is actually like out here being bisexual. Like even when she's not attached to Byleth, she is interested in men and women, which is not necessarily the case for some of the other characters. In this string, Byleth catches Dorothea finishing a date, and Byleth is oddly judgmental about the fact that Dorothea is, for lack of a better term, a player. Dorothea says she's looking for a partner. Gender neutral language is used. She wants a partner with a capital P to take care of her for the rest of her life. Dorothea flirts with Byleth too and is on the brink of initiating a problematic student-teacher relationship, but she's saving that for someone else. In a later interaction, Dorothea expresses feeling really vulnerable about Byleth. She feels like Byleth can see through her shtick, and so she asks about a weakness of Byleth's. She comes on to them again, and there's a joke about Byleth not having a heart, which is actually true, just neither of them know it. It's really for the player. And then in their last interaction, Dorothea shares her tragic opera backstory, how she was poor, she was thrust into fame. She really fears becoming old and her voice changing, and thinks once she hits that point, she'll no longer be valuable. It's very Taylor Swift coded to be 23 and concerned about aging out. She also really worries that she'll end up back where she started, poor and on the streets, as an old person instead of as a child. Their S rank is a pretty standard romantic proposal, and in each of their paired endings, Byleth is in charge of the country while Dorothea tends to the home. They say that her experience as a commoner offers valuable insight to Byleth's decisions, which is interesting because Byleth was a traveling mercenary for a while, and I know the whole point of Byleth is that they were living a pretty unplugged, isolated life, but it's not like they were a noble either. Anyways, they wrote love poems back and forth, and that was very sweet. Another common thing is that Dorothea loves to write operas. That'll come up a couple more times. In her conversations with Edelgard shares her vision to eliminate class disparity and reward the Swedish people. Edelgard shares her vision to eliminate class disparity and reward people based on merit instead of lineage, which Dorothea is here for because she hates the nobles. Dorothea thinks 80s exploits will make for a great opera one day. Later, they talk about romance and there's some bisexual tension, and then in their A rank, Edelgard notices that Dorothea isn't really interested in men anymore. Dorothea keeps talking... That is so funny. Why did I write it like that? Dorothea keeps talking about the Edelgopera and how she'll play Edelgard, but 80 says that won't be possible when Dorothea herself will play a pivotal role in the Empress's story. Very loose implications of romance. In their ending, no queerness to be found. Dorothea just writes the opera and Edelgard starts to watch her perform. This is a mystical songstress ending, and I'm taking that to mean that they're not together. Hubert's support string is like not that interesting. It highlights this aspect of Dorothea's character where she's interested in nobility who don't act proper. And I think she's interested in Hubert because he does act for gain, but he's not really doing it in a socially acceptable way. Hubert is crazy. He really is like Edelgard's Black Ops leader. He does a lot of bad things. And I think Dorothea is like just fixated on that. Hubert's main character trait is that he's obsessed with Edelgard, and Dorothea is low-key like, wow, I kind of want someone to be obsessed with me like that. By the time their A rank rolls around, Dorothea ends up really liking that Hubert has a lot of conviction when it comes to his mission to support the Empress. Dorothea proposes and offers unyielding support for Edelgard, and Hubie's like, sure. Their ending, in my opinion, is one of the coolest because they revitalize the opera company and start doing a touring show, but it's a covert intelligence gathering mission, and they're both basically spies. It's one of the more interesting endings for sure. Ferdinand. Dorothea's interactions with Ferdinand are partially why she's one of my favorites. In their C rank, they definitely have an interaction that is like memed on within the Fire Emblem community. Not this specific interaction, but how a lot of the writing in initial support conversations will just be two characters going, fuck you, and walking away from each other. It's very that. Basically, Ferdinand is trying to figure out why Dorothea can't stand the nobility, and she says it's because Ferdinand is like a bee, and he doesn't understand the metaphor. In their B rank, Ferdinand mistakes this to be about how he's such a hard worker, so he bakes her treats from scratch, and at first, Dorothea is not impressed, but he explains that he harvested the wheat himself, and he worked part-time to buy the sugar, and he baked it on his own. She also sees that he has a burn on his hand from the oven, and she starts to reconsider him. In their A rank, Dorothea is at the church, and she's praying. She insults the goddess that allowed her to suffer in poverty. Ferdy asks her about it, and she talks about how she was treated terribly until she was famous, bringing up an instance where a noble kicked her in the streets but later bought her a pair of shoes after she blew up. Haters will always love to change their mind and say that they've always been a fan. Dorothea then recounts a run-in that they had together as children where Ferdinand ran away from her, and she assumed it was because she was poor and dirty. And now that they're at the academy, she thinks that he's attracted to her like a bee to a flower. Ferdinand apologizes and says he thought she was a water nymph because she was so pretty, and really blames it on him being young. This is also one of very few times that out-of-universe mythology is ever brought up in Fire Emblem at large, TBH. So he basically thought she was like a ghost, and he got scared and ran away, and then when he came back, she was gone. He then says that he doesn't mind being a bee since bees live to serve their queen, and Dorothea is like, oh, I could get used to that. Their ending is similar to Byleth's, where she gets married to Ferdinand and offers him a commoner POV. Linhardt's interaction is not that interesting to me. It's like if Pride and Prejudice was retooled as Pride and Laziness. One of the more interesting parts that's about Dorothea is that two knights are like gossiping about the fact that a noble is paying her way through school, and Linhardt is like, put on your sunglasses and ignore the haters. It's all right, but I don't know if this plot line needed 4 different conversations to get it from point A to point B. In the end, they get married, and Dorothea helps Linhardt do crust research, and people thought they were an odd couple. Her supports with Caspar also aren't that interesting to me. It's kind of flirtatious, but the two settle on being friends at the end, and then after doing their own things for a couple of years, they both quit, drop everything, and disappear. They fall off the face of the earth, and it's assumed that they spent the rest of their lives together. In her supports with Bernadetta, Bernadetta wants to get close to Dorothea because she's popular and confident, and Bernie is anxious and lonely. Dorothea's like, oh, I thought we were already friends, and Bernie is like, father will not have this, and she runs away because she's anxiety manifested. And then in their B rank, Bernadetta trauma dumps that her parents hate poor people and would hurt Dorothea if they knew that they were close, and she shares a past experience where the boy that she had a crush on growing up got beaten up and then she never saw him again. Dorothea really tries to soothe the situation, and she's like, that's okay, I've survived kidnappings and attempts on my life, and she was strong enough to defend herself, and that's kind of where their supports end off. They do not have a shared ending. Oh my god, with Petra, lesbian pride. Lesbian pride. In the C rank, Dorothea talks to Petra about being basically a war prisoner and offers to try and make her a meal from Brigid, her home country, but Petra refuses because Dorothea is apparently a terrible cook. In their B rank, they both share their resentments for the Empire and continue to deepen their bond. Let's just say that. In the A rank, they both really emotionally support each other. They both want the war to be over, and they say that they'll always be a shoulder for the other to cry on. And Petra invites Dorothea to come stay in Brigid with her after the war. Their ending is really interesting. They both go back to Brigid and declare it an independent state, and Dorothea is said to be the person that Petra loved the most. It's really sapphic, and I believe it. Felix's line is another fuck off, don't talk to me support. Honestly, this one is the most like Pride and Prejudice, and they continue to just argue, and then Felix is like, Dorothea, I know that you're only here because you want to marry a noble man, and I don't plan on inheriting my family's title. I actually hate my family and the kingdom, so you should really just like move on. Don't talk to me. And Dorothea's like, yep, I'm just a stupid woman. Hey Felix, how about you go fuck yourself? There's a similar feeling here to Hubert's interaction, where she's interested in Felix because he has a very different approach and mindset about being a noble than most other people do. In their A rank, they spar together. It's very enemies to lovers, where Felix is like, you can hold your own, huh? And Dorothea is like, yeah, I can. Now you're gonna come to tea with me, even though I know you don't want to. And Felix is like, okay. They have an A+ rank. Definitely, I think this support line benefits from having 4 conversations, but they basically just bicker. I'm already sold on the relationship, so I'm like, here for it. They have 2 different paired endings depending on which route you're playing. So if you're playing the Blue Lions route and you recruit Dorothea, her and Felix do get married, and she travels with Felix since he's the king's right hand. Again, she's writing operas about these times. In any of the other routes, Felix becomes a mercenary and Dorothea returns to singing. With Sylvain, I love Sylvain. So Sylvain and Dorothea are both, I don't want to say sluts, but they're both playing the field in different ways, but they're not willing to play each other's game. Dorothea thinks Sylvain is too much of a womanizer and he doesn't earnestly love anybody, so she shuts him down, but Sylvain loves the chase. In the B rank, again, they're laying into each other. Dorothea is like, you wouldn't want to go out with me if I was old and ugly. And Sylvain is like, yeah, you wouldn't want to go out with me if I was crestless and broke. And they're both like, you are correct. And then they go to dinner. In the A rank, they're showing the judges vulnerability. They both talk about their insecurities. Sylvain worries that no one would want him if it weren't for his crest and his status, and Dorothea feels the same about her talent. And then they actually fall for each other. Sylvain says he wants to grow old with her, and Dorothea is smitten. They're a match made in heaven. In each of their endings, they get married. In her support with Ingrid, it's basically just about Dorothea giving her a makeover. The main interesting thing to me here, though, is that some of Ingrid's dialogue will change depending on her progress with Annette's support string. Most of the support conversations in Three Houses have some variation. For example, the tense will change depending on part 1 or part 2, or certain context elements will be different depending on which route you're playing. But in terms of all of the conversations that I've read for this video, this is the most specific circumstance for a dialogue change that I've seen. Speaking of reading a lot, I do have to sift through a lot of kind of mundane content in order to put these videos together and pick out the things that I find the most interesting. Obviously, I enjoy doing it, otherwise we wouldn't be here. But if you are having a nice time and you're not already subscribed, I'm just saying it would be a nice thing for you to do. In 2024, 60% of the people who watched my stuff were not subscribed, and we are trying to grow the business. So if you want to stick around for more content like this, I'm not going to stop unless they stop making Fire Emblem. In her support strings with Lorenz, he talks about why he would never date a commoner, but by the end of it, he's basically like, yeah, I could date a normie girl. And then they end up having a fabulous wedding. Yuri is a DLC character from the Ashen Wolves, which is just a secret underground society that has existed under Garrick Mach the whole time. In the first couple of conversations, Dorothea finds out that Yuri is also a very good singer. Again, she's putting on a free performance to entertain some local children. She ends up hurting her foot though, and she can't perform, so she asks Yuri to step in for her. Yuri really doesn't want to do it for whatever reason. He doesn't like singing, but because she's in pain, he says yes. The A rank gets crazy. Yuri reveals that he doesn't like singing by indirectly implying that a lot of the nobles who were sexually interested in Dorothea would seek out similar types to satiate that need, insinuating that Yuri was sleeping with them, probably for money. This scandalized me a little bit just because most of the stories in Three Houses are not particularly adult. I forgot that Yuri's content is much more mature compared to a lot of the other characters. He's really the banana fish of Three Houses. He doesn't use definitive language, so another reading of this interaction is definitely possible, but I did sift around the internet just to make sure that my reading of the situation wasn't like a total miscategorization, but I do think that's what the implication is. The narrative also doesn't do much to interrogate this point specifically. They drop it pretty much right away. The conversation moves along and they just talk about opening a theater together, which they end up doing in their paired ending. Dorothea's supports with Manuela are interesting because Manuela also used to be a diva. So Manuela is one of few characters on the cast that Dorothea actually has a history with. The dialogue, I think, is interesting. The only new information that we get is that even though some unknown agent is paying for Dorothea to be at the school, she still had to go through a lot of hoops to be here, and she still had to like apply and have good marks. Like her spot at the school wasn't bought, so her achievement is outlined here. By the end of their support string, they both have sworn off men and decide to live together. Again, perhaps problematic student-teacher relationship. It's not explicitly romantic, but we'll get to the kicker in just a second, because with Hanneman, another teacher at the university, they are in a crazy age gap relationship. He is more than double her age. They get married, and they choose to keep it a secret, basically because it's problematic. This support, not that interesting to me, but there is a compelling piece of lore that I'd love for us to chew on for a little bit. In their B rank conversation, they get into Dorothea's background, how she was born to a noble father, and she explicitly says that he threw them away because she wasn't born with a crest. There's also a nasty implication that he didn't recognize her and tried to hit on her when she became famous, but she doesn't know for certain that it was him. Now, Three Hopes definitely expanded the lore and showed us that a lot of other characters can have crests, even if they're not a part of the main story. They are slightly more common than how they're presented in Three Houses. Crests can manifest in anyone of a certain ancestry, but for the sake of intrigue, I would like to posit that Dorothea has a half-sibling on the cast and just neither of them know about it. Or maybe like a cousin. Not that I'm necessarily rooting for a Dorothea incest storyline, since she does have romantic endings with a lot of Empire crest bearers, but maybe her and Caspar don't explicitly end up together because they find out something not so positive about the Minister of Military Affairs. Or like, what if she was Bernadetta's half-sister, and her dad, who already is a shitty man, is even worse than we thought? Who's to say? That's just a theory. A gay theory. Thanks for watching. Just kidding, we're not done. The last thing I want to talk about is Three Hopes, and thankfully there's a lot less talking in that game, at least from Dorothea. A lot of the characters are expanded on in a really interesting way. Some of the characters, they do the opposite, and I think Dorothea shrinks in Three Hopes. I find her less compelling. This might also have to do with the fact that there's no paired endings, so romance is much less of a focus, and her pursuit of romance is such an integral part of her character in Three Houses. I find that they defang her in Three Hopes. She doesn't have as much of an attitude. There's less spunk. What I found was that they lean more into the pacifist reading of the character, even in some of these support conversations. I'll only talk about the ones that are interesting to me. In Hubert's, Dorothea is invited to go back to the opera, and Hubert encourages her to go, but Dorothea says she needs to stay and support Edelgard as a representative of the peasant class, and if she leaves, it's not good for optics. That's not what they're actually saying, but that's what I'm taking it. Caspar's is funny because Dorothea is teaching him how to read. Monica is essentially an original character in Three Hopes, and Monica's a theater loser and a Dorothea stan. In the A rank, Dorothea's pacifism comes up again, and she talks about not wanting to hurt a child soldier and affirms that she wants to help end the war so that other kids don't have to be tormented by its consequences. Manuela and Dorothea also have a paralogue in Three Hopes. It's also an escort mission, but in this case, they're escorting the new opera diva. Her name is Adrienne. There is a cool detail in this fight as well, where if you defeat certain enemies with either Dorothea or Manuela, like you're fighting the fans, and if you defeat them with the proper character, they'll join you. I think that's a cool detail. Anyways, that's all I really have to say about this character. I like Dorothea a lot. I think they take the Charlotte kind of character from Fates, who is also really interested in securing an upper class husband. She's played for laughs a little bit more, but I think they make interesting choices with Dorothea's character and expanding that sort of POV in a new direction. New directions: Glee, Rachel Berry, Leah Michelle. Leah Michelle can't read. Caspar can't read. Dorothea teaches her how to read. Dorothea, Diva, Dulcet Diva, Juna, Wicked, The Wizard and I. Yeah, I think that's it. That's all for today. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. Is there another character that you want me to talk about? I will say I was originally going to talk about a different character for this video, and then I changed my mind because of Juna from Metaphori Fantasio. Guess in the comments down below who I was going to make this video about originally. I have talked about them in this video. Who is your favorite character from Three Houses? Do you like Dorothea? Do you hate Dorothea? Do you agree with my unit analysis? Do you agree with my literary analysis? Are there things that I neglected that you picked up on? Share it in the comments. Check out my Blue Sky, check out my Patreon. I have a coffee. Tipping options are below. Bisexual. That was stupid. There always needs to be a stupid button at the end of a video.